"Dear, I have a surprise for you. You will soon become a father," his wife told him. Agree, this is good news. But the main character knew that he was infertile, which means one thing: his wife cheated on him. "Greetings, my dear friend. Allow me to introduce myself, Noah Smith. There's no point in beating around the bush. I'm brilliant, and that's no exaggeration. From a very young age in school, I was that kid who always stood out, the one whom both teachers and classmates recognized as the smartest in the class. By 10th grade, I wasn't just coasting along anymore. I was already taking college-level courses. I graduated easily, and by 19, I held my diploma in hand, just in time to immediately pursue a master's degree in computer science. After finishing, I found a job where I'm responsible for ensuring everything runs smoothly. Confused? Let me clarify. This morning, when you flipped the switch and the bathroom light came on, that was me. When you splashed water on your face, that was me too. And when you swiped your credit card for that expensive morning coffee, yes, I had a hand in that as well. Does it make sense now? So, to be clear, all those things I just mentioned, electricity, water, payments, I'm the one making sure nobody messes with them. I protect your data, keep the lights on, and ensure a steady power supply. Now we're on the same page. However, all this knowledge didn't come without sacrifices. For example, my personal life suffered. I didn't have a relationship until I was 20. My first experience felt more like an experiment than a romantic moment. We both achieved the goal, deemed it successful, and didn't repeat it. It wasn't until I earned a hefty bonus and a six-figure salary that I decided to try dating seriously. I went all out. $3,000 on a suit, $155,000 on a Rolex, and I bought a Maserati for $400,000. Yes, the bonus was that generous. But oddly enough, the first 2 nights were complete failures. Then one evening, I parked the Maserati, walked into a bar, and sat down. I ordered a whiskey neat even though I hated it. It was more for show, just to stay in place. The bartender appreciated my tip, so I kept sitting. Soon, a blonde woman sat next to me and ordered a drink. She talked, and I mostly listened for almost an hour. Normally, I keep conversations with women short to avoid revealing my shyness. She kept talking, and eventually, she mentioned that it was time for her to leave. Before going, she asked if I wanted to take her to dinner that Saturday. I took her number and address, and that's how I got back into the dating game. That weekend, I showed up at her place with flowers. She thanked me, put them in a vase, and we headed to dinner. She was captivated by the car, asking endless questions about it. Dinner that evening was at a fancy, romantic restaurant, just as I had planned. Afterward, we aimlessly drove around the city. When we arrived at her house, I walked her to the door and got a kiss on the cheek. I was on top of the world when she suggested meeting again the following week. 2 weeks later, after a few more dates, she invited me to her place. Let's just say I earned the title of her official boyfriend. We took a break, then came round 2. She said I was amazing, a true champion in her words. This routine lasted for 6 months. Then one evening, she suggested we have a cozy night at home. As we sat down to cold turkey sandwiches, she dropped the big news. I was going to be a father. I was stunned, and I'll explain why later, but I asked her what she planned to do. Her answer was that her religious beliefs didn't allow her to consider abortion, so she was going to keep the baby. I offered to marry her, to take the right step if that's what she wanted. She agreed, and just 2 days later, we found ourselves in Las Vegas, where we got married in a little chapel of love. We celebrated at the MGM Grand before heading back home to start our new life together. After I helped her move out of her apartment, I brought her to my house, a place that was much more than just a dwelling. It was a huge mansion with 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a 4-car garage, a pool, tennis courts, a jacuzzi, and a gym in the basement that I never used. There was even a 30-seat movie theater, though, like the gym, it sat unused. She seemed to enjoy her new lifestyle. She quit her job and focused on becoming a mother. Every day, I braced myself for the moment I would come home and find her devastated by a miscarriage. You see, we had agreed to be faithful to each other when we started dating, and I trusted that promise. But when she told me she was pregnant, She didn't know that I had been infertile for a long time. My infertility was a result of MPS I contracted as a child, since my mother refused to vaccinate me after I recovered. I was left sterile. It was a secret I had never shared with her and never intended to. I had always wanted children, but I quietly gave up on that dream as an only child with no parents or relatives left. I was completely alone. So when we found out she was expecting twins, it was the happiest moment of my life. Despite knowing the truth, I let her believe everything was fine. When the children were born, I accepted them as my own, twin boys, both with my black hair and blue eyes, though they inherited their mother's nose. Even knowing they weren't biologically mine, I loved them as if they were. For a while, everything seemed perfect. But a couple of months after they were born, Elizabeth started to change. The doctors diagnosed her with postpartum depression. In that time, we went through 3 different nannies. She became distant and difficult to communicate with. Just as I had resigned myself to the fact that this would be our new reality, she suddenly changed. She became cheerful again, smiling and playing with the boys. She began going out once or twice a week, reconnecting with friends. I didn't ask any questions. Our relationship was revived, and we spent time together several times a week. I became more involved in caring for the children, often taking on night duties, which gave me a sense of fulfillment. But one day during lunch, one of Elizabeth's old friends approached my table and asked how she and the twins were doing. As she was about to leave, she added, "Tell Elizabeth to call me sometime. We haven't talked in so long." This comment made me suspicious. Just last night, Elizabeth had gone out with that friend for drinks. That's when I began to doubt. I installed a GPS tracker on her car, another one on her phone, and discreetly placed cameras throughout the house, just in case she brought someone home. She didn't, but the tracker showed where she went and who she met with. The next time she went out for drinks, I followed her to a motel on the outskirts of town. I parked outside, room 104, with the twins in their car seats, and waited. Her car was parked next to another vehicle, the only one with local plates. I photographed both cars and their license plates, then drove home. By the time she got back, I had already bathed the boys and put them to bed. She took a shower, slid into bed next to me, kissed me on the cheek, and said how tired she was. "Yes, I can imagine," I replied. The next day, I sent those photos to the wife of Liam Murphy. His car had been parked outside the Super 9 motel. In my message, I added that the other vehicle belonged to Elizabeth Smith. The consequences were swift. Mrs. Murphy came to our house and slapped Elizabeth across the face. I rushed home, pretending I had received the same photos in my inbox. I walked in just as the slap landed. When I started talking to Elizabeth, she didn't try to hide the truth. With tears in her eyes, she confessed, blaming everything on a moment of weakness brought on by her depression. She cried, and I cried with her. Somehow, I found the strength to forgive her. I tried to understand, to make sense of it all, but I made one thing clear. This was her only chance. If it ever happened again, I would leave and take the boys with me. For almost a year, life seemed to return to some semblance of normality after she swore she had learned her lesson. But I never fully relaxed. I left the trackers in place, and the hidden cameras kept recording. From Elizabeth Smith's perspective, the biggest mystery remained. How did Noah and Liam uncover her infidelity? Noah, sitting at home with the kids while I was away, had no idea what I had planned. After months of unsuccessful attempts to conceive a child with him, I decided to take matters into my own hands. One evening, I went to a bar and locked eyes with a stranger, a dark-haired, blue-eyed man whose name I have since forgotten. We spent the night together until he collapsed from exhaustion. The plan worked perfectly. Now Noah is so attached to the children that he threatens to kick me out and take them for himself. The irony is unbearable. He doesn't even realize we live in a state where fault doesn't matter. Even if I had slept with the entire local high school football team, the law would still be on my side. The house, the kids, they would all stay with me, and Noah would be obligated to pay alimony and child support. I've never worked, and his steady income from fixing computers or whatever he does would secure my financial future. He's always been vague about his job. Not long after Liam's wife slapped me and filed for divorce, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Oscar Leamy, my first love. You understand, don't you? It was in school. He was a senior, a basketball player, and I was in my junior year. It ended abruptly when my father got transferred, and we moved to another state. Life went on, and I hadn't heard anything about Oscar since some old friends mentioned that he got into trouble with the law and then disappeared. And there he was, standing right in front of me. He hadn't changed a bit. The moment he looked at me, I knew he recognized me. "Oscar?" I asked, barely believing it was him. "Elizabeth," he replied, reaching out his hand. But I ignored it and kissed him right there in the bread aisle of the grocery store. We quickly exchanged numbers, and I told him right away that I was married but interested in rekindling our relationship. He stood immediately and we arranged to meet. He said he wasn't seeing anyone and lived in a rented house in a nice neighborhood. I knew the area. It would be much easier than sneaking off to a hotel. He mentioned that he worked odd hours as a warehouse manager and had Wednesdays and Thursdays off, which I found a bit strange, but I didn't question it. One odd detail caught my eye. His shirt had the name Ethan embroidered on it instead of his own. I mentally noted to ask him about that later, but for the moment, I needed to get back home. The nanny was leaving at 3, and I needed to cook dinner for Noah. From Noah's perspective, I got home and the air was filled with the smell of stew. Elizabeth was glowing, almost too sweet, which made me suspicious. Something was off. I checked the GPS data from her car and phone, but nothing seemed suspicious. Since the last time she cheated, she had been acting like her old self, and we had resumed our intimate relationship. We were together several times a week and did almost everything like a couple, but something about her behavior still bothered me, so I decided to increase my surveillance. That night, after dinner, I took her phone under the pretext that I needed to check something. I installed a new app that notified me of any incoming and outgoing calls from her phone. I could eavesdrop on conversations if I wanted and even view her call logs without her noticing. The app allowed me to use her phone as a listening device, picking up conversations within a 15-foot radius. It's amazing what modern technology can do. Back to Elizabeth's perspective, I waited until the following Tuesday to call Oscar. Here's the truth. I really do love Noah. In a way, I think I do. I grew up in a family where money was tight, but my parents managed. I always promised myself I'd do better than they did. When I first saw Noah pull up in his shiny Maserati and sit at the bar, flashing his Rolex, I made my move. I did whatever it took to make him mine. This shy, introverted man turned into putty in my hands in a matter of months. My life changed completely. I got married and was expecting a child. My husband, Noah, was thrilled about becoming a father, and his enthusiasm sealed my fate. I was now bound to him, his world, and the financial stability that came with his salary. But none of that stopped me from making my own plans with Oscar. Noah would never suspect anything. He would never notice. That Wednesday, I parked my car in Oscar's garage as I slipped into his house through the garage. A familiar thrill washed over me. No one knew where I was, and I made sure not to leave any traces. Today had to be perfect, no evidence. How could I describe the time spent with Oscar? It was incredible. I savored the deception, knowing that my attentive husband wouldn't catch on. At one point, I even told Oscar that he was better than Noah in every way. Of course, most of that was just said in the heat of the moment, without much thought. In reality, I hadn't thought about Oscar in years. When we were finished, I went to the bathroom to freshen up. Oscar tried to convince me to stay longer, but I knew I needed to get home before Noah started asking questions. I promised Oscar I would return the next day. There was a Mother's Day program at our church, which meant I could drop off the kids at 9 a.m. and pick them up at 3 p.m. We would have plenty of time. Oscar was pleased, and we agreed to meet again. On the drive home, I was filled with a sense of euphoria. I had regained control. However, later, a wave of guilt started to creep over me. To silence it, when Noah initiated intimacy that night, I didn't resist. I let him think everything was fine. From Oscar's perspective, she thinks she's being clever, assuming I haven't noticed her little games. She thinks today went unnoticed. Sure, I might have missed the early signs, but I overheard enough when she was on the phone with her lover. She was all excited, telling him how much she missed him and that he was the best she ever had. Unbelievable. I thought we had moved past all this nonsense, but after a little investigation, I found out more than I expected. The house she's been visiting is rented under the name of a man named Ethan Anderson, a black man who works in a warehouse, has his own car. How did she meet him and why does she call him Oscar? I need more time to figure this out and come up with a plan to get rid of him, just like I dealt with the Murphy problem. From my perspective, you want to know my side of the story. Alright, here it is. I played basketball in school, not too bad, though not good enough for it to make a difference. In my senior year, I met a girl named Elizabeth and we started dating. One night, I took her virginity in the back seat of my grandmother's Buick. That night was unforgettable. We dated for about 6 months before she moved away, and that was the last time I saw her. After school, I didn't have many prospects. College wasn't an option for a poor black kid who barely got by in school. My basketball skills didn't lead anywhere either, so I turned to the streets. I started hustling, selling drugs on the corner, and making decent money. My grandmother hated it and begged me to stop, but there was nothing better for me. Over time, I climbed the ranks. One of the Mexican bosses took a liking to me, and soon I was running my own crew on the streets. One night, we caught one of my guys stealing. To make an example of him, I dragged him into an alley and shot him. At first, I thought about dumping the gun in the river, but then I remembered something. My Mexican boss liked to shoot for fun, so one time I took him to the shooting range. When we were done, I joked that my gun didn't shoot straight. He took the gun, fired a few shots, then handed it back laughing. "It's not the gun, it's the shooter." I just smiled, thanked him, and remembered that moment for the next couple of years. Everything went smoothly. I climbed the ranks of the La Sombra cartel, got my own territory, and the money kept flowing in. How I was crossing the border with 10 kilograms of heroin, hidden in the car, seemed like just another routine event until the tire blew out. A patrol officer stopped offering assistance, and in my panic, I started trying too hard to convince him that everything was fine. His suspicions grew, and soon he was checking the trunk. Before I could fully understand what was happening, 5 patrol cars surrounded me. My secret was out. These officers weren't just regular cops. They were federal agents. After they processed me and placed me in a cell, a lawyer appeared, telling me to keep my mouth shut and assuring me that he could work out a deal. 2 days passed, and he came back with an offer. 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15. Reluctantly, I agreed to the terms. Sitting in my cell, I asked to speak with the DEA agent who had arrested me. In a secluded room away from the noise of the prison, I offered an alternative. I made up a story about a street shooter named Juan Flores and how I'd accidentally found a gun with his fingerprints on it. In exchange for cooperation and the witness protection program, I handed over the gun. The weapon was tested, and Juan was arrested. I testified against him in court, and he was sentenced to 99 years in a maximum security federal prison, with no chance of parole and restricted visits. Later, I learned that Juan was the eldest son of Don Fernando, the formidable leader of the La Sombra cartel. As expected, Don Fernando didn't take kindly to my betrayal. Soon after, I found out he had placed a bounty on my head, $500,000 to anyone who could deliver it. Literally, decapitation was their signature method of dealing with enemies. The FBI quickly relocated me to another city and compensated me with $100,000 for my testimony. I found a modest apartment and got a job at a warehouse for 2 years. I lived a quiet life, operating a forklift, loading and unloading trucks, thinking my past was behind me. That illusion shattered the day a truck driver called out, "Oscar." My heart skipped a beat as I turned around and saw a familiar face from my high school basketball team. We shook hands, and he told me he had moved here with his wife to be closer to her family. He suggested we catch up over the weekend to reminisce. As soon as he left, I contacted my handler at the marshal's office that same night. I was moved again, this time to a grimy motel. I spent 2 days in that shabby room memorizing my new identity before starting the job search again. Fortunately, forklift operators were always in demand, and I quickly settled into a new routine. One day, on my day off, I ran into Elizabeth. It had been years since I last thought about her, but our conversation reignited old feelings. Against my better judgment, I didn't inform the marshals. The idea of moving again seemed exhausting, and Elizabeth assured me she had as much to lose as I did. Her husband might not be as dangerous as my enemies, but she wasn't willing to give up her comfortable life. We decided that, if we were careful, no one would ever find out. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. We both got what we wanted, and no one would ever know. Our first meeting was brief. Elizabeth had to get back home, but she promised to return the next day with plenty of time to spare. From Elizabeth's perspective, she hurriedly dropped her twins off at church before heading to see me. The entire day was hers to enjoy, and she wanted to savor every moment. When she pulled into the garage, which was already open and ready for her, her heart raced with excitement. Her secret was safe. No one knew where she was, and her car was hidden from sight. She had 5 hours of peace ahead of her. She was in paradise. She placed her phone on the bedside table, in case anything urgent happened with her children or her husband, Noah. She didn't expect any emergencies, but caution never hurt. From Noah's perspective, that day destroyed everything. I heard it all. Her desperate, heavy pleas as she begged him not to stop, urging him on. She made sounds I didn't know she could make, and his touches were ones I'd never given her. But the final blow came when she screamed, "Oscar Lee, you're the best I've ever had. Now I have a name, Ethan Anderson. Could this be the mysterious neighbor? Wait, hold on, the driver's license clearly states Ethan Anderson, and the photo matches perfectly. It looks like I need to dig deeper into Oscar Atkins' case. And what's this? Jackpot. It turns out Oscar is currently in the witness protection program. A little searching on the dark web, and it's revealed that there's a sizable bounty on his head from the La Sombra. These guys aren't known for their kindness to traitors. I have a feeling they wouldn't mind making a deal with me. I was sitting at the kitchen table when Elizabeth walked into the room. The look on her face showed how unexpected my early return was for her. I usually don't come home until 5, so she looked a bit surprised. From Elizabeth's perspective, Noah's back early. Something must have happened, probably at work. Maybe tonight, if I offer myself to him, it will relieve the stress he's clearly feeling. I rush over to him, expecting a kiss, but instead, Noah shifts his attention to sitting the boys in front of the TV. A slight worry begins to grow in me, but I brush it aside and head to the kitchen, preparing to start dinner. But just as I'm about to, Noah stops me and asks me to sit down. My unease grows stronger. "I got a call today," he begins. "From your phone." I blink, confused. "From my phone?" "Listen to this," he says, pulling out his phone. He presses play, and immediately my stomach tightens. "Oh yes?" Harder. Just like that. "Don't stop." Panic floods me, and I slam my hand down to stop the recording. God, I must have accidentally called Noah when I left the phone on the nightstand. Thoughts race through my head, but before I can say anything, Noah breaks the silence. "Do you remember what I said when I found out you were cheating again?" His gaze pierces me. This quiet, introverted man, whom I had skillfully manipulated into marrying me, now stands before me with unexpected resolve. But I change tactics. "This time it's different, Noah. Stop this, you won't divorce me. Think you'll lose everything? This is a no-fault state." I continue, growing more confident. "Infidelity changes nothing. The boys and I will stay in the house, and you'll pay for everything. Alimony, child support, the works." I allow myself a sly smile. "Honestly, I could even invite Oscar to help raise your kids, and there's nothing you could do about it. So, before you destroy your life, think carefully." His irritation peaks as he finally asks, "Who is Oscar?" I admit calmly, "He's my high school sweetheart, my first love. We happened to run into each other at the grocery store last week. Yesterday was the first time we slept together." I lean forward, maintaining control of the conversation. And just so you know, I didn't come home and offer you what was left after him. Believe me, it's all going to end with him soon. He's not that great in bed, to be honest, selfish. In a few months, maybe 3, all of this will pass. We'll go back to how things were, raising our boys together. Or would you prefer to see them once a month from some dingy apartment? I smoothly continue my speech. What I'm offering you is this. I'll stay with you, and I'll see Oscar on the side. What do you say? Noah hesitates but then agrees. All right, but there are a few conditions, and I expect you to meet them. I raise an eyebrow, intrigued. What conditions? First, you can't fall in love with him and leave me. Noah continues. I laugh, waving off his concern. Don't worry about that. I swear it won't happen. Oscar's a warehouse worker. I'm not leaving you for a man like that. Second, Noah continues. He is never to set foot in this house. Deal, I say without hesitation. He'll never come here. This house is meant for us and our family, and no one else, I said firmly. And third, I don't want Oscar ever to know that I'm aware of him. That will be our secret, something I can hold on to when he's with you. This is just between us, she whispered softly. It's not difficult, darling. I promise. He'll always think it's just him and me. I understand why you want that. What stays just between us? I continued. Is that fourth? No calls to Oscar from our home phone. If you need to talk to him, step out onto the terrace and call from your mobile. That's not a problem, she responded indifferently. I've barely called him, only a few times, and he's never called me. I only called to check if he was home, not at work, so it's no big deal. She hesitated, then added, Noah, this isn't some teenage crush. There's no love here for both of us. It's just physical. That's why I know it won't last long. I replied, all right, agreed, she said with a faint smile. When are you planning to meet Oscar again? I asked. As I've already told you, it will only be midweek, Wednesdays and Thursdays. No more dinners, no drinks, no going out. It's purely physical, nothing more. I nodded without saying a word. Deep inside, I love Noah, she thought. He's remarkable in many ways, but at the same time, naive. I can get out of any situation with him. All it takes is promising to bring some passion back into our relationship, and he'll forgive my mistakes. Give him 6 months, and I'm sure he'll agree to let me be with Oscar while he watches. Noah is the perfect partner. He just doesn't realize it yet. From Noah's perspective, I told her I'd be working all weekend, Saturday and Sunday. That was a lie. In reality, I was tying up loose ends, covering my tracks, deleting all my search queries about Oscar Lee and Ethan Anderson on the dark web. I also arranged a meeting with a lawyer in another city. What lawyer? You ask. It was the lawyer representing Juan Flores in his appeal. I had information that could be useful, including the location of a key witness and a video clip that I knew would interest him, but it wasn't cheap. When he asked about the price, I named a sum of $500,000. He immediately understood the situation. On Sunday evening, I pretended to be tired, acting as if I wasn't in the mood for anything intimate. She accused me of sulking. At dawn on Tuesday, I left the house, taking a 2-hour flight to the city where Juan Flores's lawyer was located. I took the day off work and told Elizabeth that I had an important business meeting and would be back late. The lawyer's office was impressive. The sign on the door read Rafael Torres, attorney. He struck me as a man deeply concerned with his own importance. I was shown in immediately. Mr. Smith, how can I assist you? He asked, greeting me. Actually, Mr. Torres, I believe I'm the one who can assist you, I said, settling into a chair. Let's get straight to the point. I have information that could help with Juan Flores's appeal. I handed him a USB drive. He examined it briefly, then inserted it into the computer. About 10 minutes later, after reviewing the contents, he turned to me. Where did you get this footage? He asked. The shooting range keeps all its security camera recordings on a cloud server, I explained. So you want to make a deal? He asked. Yes, I do, I responded smoothly. And regarding the other matter, do I know the whereabouts of the key witness? I do, but I need something in return. I let the sentence hang in the air, allowing the weight of the offer to settle. Could you please wait in the lobby for a while? I need to discuss something with a colleague, he said, rising from his chair and heading toward the door. I nodded, feeling anxious as I sat down in one of the lobby chairs, unsure of what to expect next. A good 15 minutes passed before the door swung open again, and an impressive woman appeared on the threshold, exuding a clear sense of style and elegance. Her presence immediately commanded attention. She hadn't been here earlier, so she must have come from another part of the office. "Good afternoon, Mr. Smith," she greeted warmly. Her voice was soft but confident. "My name is Valeria. How about we have lunch together?" The unexpected offer caught me off guard, and I awkwardly replied, Sure." Probably louder than I should have at that moment. Torres, with whom I had initially met, appeared behind her. "Excellent. From now on, you no longer need to deal with this office. Valeria will take over everything. Thank you for your time, Mr. Smith. And I apologize that we couldn't offer more help." Valeria gently took my arm and guided me toward the elevator. "Don't worry," she said, her voice soothing. "Juan, as you know, prefers not to get involved in these matters, so I'll handle everything." I couldn't help but wince at the mention of lawyers. I had never been fond of them. We silently descended in the elevator to the garage, where a man was waiting next to a black car with tinted windows. The driver opened the door, revealing a flawless black leather interior. The car looked like it belonged to someone you definitely wouldn't want to cross, perhaps a high-ranking mafia boss. Without a word, Valeria slid into the back seat and gestured for me to join her. "Coming?" she asked with a playful glint in her eye. I hesitated for a moment before getting inside, realizing mentally that there was no turning back. The phrase "no way out now" echoed in my head as I saw her sitting next to me, graceful with long dark hair cascading down her back and almost black eyes that seemed to peer into my soul. She leaned forward slightly and gave the driver instructions. "Let's head to Mama Torres' restaurant," she said. "I hope you like Mexican food," she added with a wink. Once again, I felt the familiar nervousness that always surfaced when talking to women, especially one like her, attractive and confident. I couldn't gather my thoughts, sensing the awkward silence. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, she gently placed her hand on mine and fixed her gaze on me. "Wait until we're at the restaurant," she whispered softly. "There, we'll have more privacy," she added, lowering her voice even further. The rest of the ride passed in silence, but my thoughts were racing. I kept glancing at her, her composed posture, the elegant way she crossed her legs, and the subtle details of her outfit that accentuated her allure. When we arrived at the restaurant, it was clear that Valeria was well known here. We were led to a private room, and as soon as the door closed behind us, the waiter discreetly activated a small device near the entrance, a signal jammer. I couldn't help but smirk. It seemed like things were about to get really interesting. "No, Valeria," began, her tone becoming serious. "We can speak freely here. Do you know where Oscar Akins is?" "Yes," I replied, fully aware of where this conversation was headed. "We're offering $500,000 for information about his whereabouts. Tell me where he is, and I'll make sure you get that money." Her voice was professional but not without warmth. "As for the flash drive," she continued, "what's your price?" "I don't want money for the flash drive," I replied firmly. "It's free. I found it while digging into Oscar's past. Honestly, a good lawyer or even the feds could have found this a long time ago. Could have prevented this whole situation. The feds were so desperate to incriminate Juan that when Oscar presented his so-called evidence, they didn't dig deeper. They needed any lead for an indictment," I added, shaking my head in disbelief at their negligence. Valeria leaned forward thoughtfully, looking at me. "Well, let's hope this helps now. But aside from the reward, is there anything else you need? Tell me. I have enough influence to make it happen." I paused, carefully choosing my words. "Actually, there is one more thing." When the waiter finally placed the multitude of dishes on our table, I couldn't help but admire the impressive array before me. Sizzling fajitas, rich enchiladas, stewed beans, creamy guacamole, soft tortillas, and tacos. 2 chilled bottles of beer perfectly complemented the meal. "Let's start eating, and you can tell me everything," she suggested. And so, over what was undoubtedly the best Mexican food I had ever tasted, I began to unravel the story of my life. I told her everything from my childhood to the moment when my wife asked if I would allow her to have an affair with Oscar. When I reached the part where I found out that the twins weren't mine, since I was infertile, she smirked slightly. I couldn't hide my irritation, but she quickly apologized, assuring me that her reaction wasn't meant as mockery. "It's just, I understand what it means to long for a family but realize it will never happen," she explained. She then shared her own past. How, at 15, she had developed severe problems with her menstruation. Doctors discovered cysts on her ovaries that had to be removed, taking away her ability to have children. When I mentioned my wife's 2 affairs, she muttered through gritted teeth, "Pa!" The genuine contempt in her voice was unmistakable. When I had finally laid everything out, the moment I dreaded the most arrived. "If you take Oscar, take her too. Then we'll be even." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Are you sure? What about the boys?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They're not even 3. They won't remember her," she responded with chilling indifference. "I'll hire a full-time nanny, and soon they won't even recall their deceitful mother." "When will they be together again?" I asked, feeling an emptiness inside. "Tomorrow morning," I answered. "Then say goodbye to your wife for the last time." "Tomorrow morning," she said, leaving no room for doubt. "So soon?" I asked in surprise. "Don't you need time to arrange everything? There's less than a day left." She cut me off sharply. "Last time we waited until the weekend, and he slipped away. That won't happen again. Give me his address," she ordered as she stood up. "If you're ready, I'll take you to the airport." I finished my last beer and followed her outside, where she hailed a cab. As I reached for the door, she gently stopped me. I turned and looked into her deep, unwavering eyes. She leaned in, kissed me on the cheek, and whispered, "Thank you." When the cab drove off, I watched as she got into her own car and closed the door behind her. At that moment, I realized that I probably wouldn't see her again. Now it's Wednesday, and I'm in my bunker, the place where I deal with everything I just told you. The secretary called me from 2 floors above, informing me that some visitors were waiting in the lobby. I took the elevator down, slipped into my office through the side door, and gave her the command to let them in. A man walked in. "Mr. Smith, I'm Detective Callum, and this is my partner, Reese Jones." We exchanged handshakes, and I gestured for them to sit down. "Mr. Smith, I'll get straight to the point. Do you know where your wife is right now?" "This morning. She told me she was going to the mall after the nanny arrived, then to pick up some groceries and then home." "Why? What happened?" He slid a photo toward me. "Is this your wife?" The blood drained from my face. "Oh my God, yes. What happened?" "We're still gathering information. We were called to investigate reports of gunshots at Eaton Anderson's house. Your wife was found dead at the scene. Do you know Eaton Anderson?" I stared blankly, unable to process what was happening. "No, I don't," I whispered. My breathing became heavy, and I added, "Please, give me a minute." I thought about the twins. My voice quivered as I sobbed. "Our boys. I understand this is difficult, but we need answers," Callum gently pressed. "Where were you around 10 this morning?" "I've been here all day. I arrived around 8, as usual, and haven't left since. You can ask my secretary or contact Special Agent Alligator from the FBI. I was helping him with some background checks, and he was in my office from 9 until 10:30. Go on, call him. Let him take me out of the game. Then you'll have the freedom to catch the real killer." I struggled to keep the irritation out of my voice. "Where did they find her?" I demanded. But Friday stood up without bothering to answer. He walked straight to the door of my office, likely to talk to my secretary or get in touch with the FBI. A few minutes later, he returned and leaned down to whisper something in Jones's ear. "All right, your story checks out," Jones said, clearly reluctant. Do you know a man named Oscar Lee? Not personally, I admitted. He was someone from my wife's past, a high school romance. She mentioned him once a long time ago. Jones nodded, his expression darkening. It turns out Oscar Lee and Ethan Anderson are the same person. I stared at him, stunned. How is that even possible? Witness protection program, Friday interjected, settling back into his chair. Here's the theory. Either the Lambra cartel figured out who he really was and he blamed your wife for outing him, which got her killed, or he wanted to leave town with her, and when she refused, he killed her. Either way, he's guilty. We have the murder weapon, a .45 caliber pistol covered in his fingerprints. I tried to process all of this, but why was she with him? Oscar or Ethan, and whoever he was, Friday didn't soften the blow. There's evidence they were having an affair. I'm sorry, but that's the reality we're dealing with. A wave of nausea twisted in my stomach. I didn't even know. My voice trailed off, drowning in disbelief. Friday's tones softened slightly. I understand this is hard, but we don't think it lasted long. He only came back to town a few months ago. The full weight of the situation slowly settled over me. Why was I the prime suspect? At first glance, it looked like a crime of passion, jealous husband. But the deeper we dug, the more it became clear this was tied to his past with the cartel. I'm truly sorry for your loss. We'll keep you updated on the investigation, the officer said, his voice somber. All I want is justice, I replied, feeling the pressure of the situation weigh heavily on me. But keep me and my kids out of this. Those cartel guys, they don't forget. Friday nodded, his expression stern. We'll make sure you stay off their radar. They're ruthless, no doubt about it. If they target you, they won't let go. But don't worry, you're not involved. They left, casting me a glance full of sympathy on their way out. The only other time I heard from the authorities was a call from the coroner. They said I could pick up her body. I didn't hesitate. I immediately called the crematorium and arranged for her cremation. A few days later, I took her ashes to the beach. I couldn't help but notice the irony. Elizabeth had always hated the beach. Liar, cheater, I muttered under my breath. You hated the ocean, and now it's going to be your final resting place. I stepped into the surf and scattered her ashes into the waves, laughing bitterly as I watched them dissolve into the water. I took 2 weeks off, not to warn her, but to spend time with my kids and keep my mind from spiraling into darkness. One afternoon, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Glancing out the window, I saw the familiar black Anderson town car, and a knot of dread tightened in my chest. What now? When I opened the door, I saw Valeria standing there with her brother Louis, both holding suitcases. I heard you need a live-in housekeeper, she said with a sly smile. Well, consider that problem solved. I stood there speechless. Are you just going to stand there? She teased. Go help Miguel with the rest of the bags. Still confused, I followed Miguel to the car, helping unload the seemingly endless amount of luggage. After a firm handshake and a knowing wink from him, I returned inside. I found Valeria in the living room, playing with my boys, who were happily tugging at her long, dark hair. Have they eaten yet? She asked, looking at me. No, I replied, still not fully grasping what was happening. Good. You watch them while I make something for lunch, she said with a smile, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. And just like that, Valeria came into my life. That night, she moved into my bedroom, and the next morning she started packing up all of Elizabeth's things, from clothes to photos, into black trash bags. She called a charity service, and by noon, everything was gone. Later, after the boys were asleep, Valeria and I sat at the kitchen table. I tried to find the words, but my throat tightened from everything left unsaid. Come on, Noah, I said, losing my patience. Let's get this over with. Ask all the questions you need to. He froze. Good question, I replied, though I didn't feel calm at all. When your wife came in the morning, Oscar was already on his way to Mexico. We picked him up the night before, right after his shift at the warehouse. He didn't suspect a thing and was heading home. We made sure his fingerprints were on the gun before we sent him off. When Elizabeth showed up around 9:30, I was alone. I told her you had rejected her and that I would now be raising her children. I promised to take good care of them, and you too. And then I shot her 3 times in the chest. It was over quickly. Oh yeah, there's one more thing, I added with a bitter smile. I told her you could have me any time, no strings attached. And unlike her, I wouldn't give you anything second-rate. That was the moment she decided to pull the trigger. Are you aware of where the investigation stands now? Noah asked, his tone changing. And what about Juan? After Oscar framing him for the murder, the FBI is distancing themselves from him. First, because he's wanted for your wife's death, and second, because the judge accepted the shooting range video as evidence that it was Juan and Oscar together in the video. Oscar puts the gun on the table, and Juan loads the magazine. He fires 10 rounds, praising the gun Oscar bought. After putting his weapon away, Juan watched as Oscar placed the gun into a plastic bag. That's the same gun Oscar later used to kill that guy on the corner. Except this time Juan's fingerprints were deliberately left on it for the getaway. He's wanted for that murder, too. As for Juan, he's hiding with our father. But there's something you should know. Our father is actually Juan's sister. Oscar, I insisted I wasn't there, he admitted. But they say he was buried somewhere in the desert south of El Paso. There's one more thing I want to ask, I said, hesitating a little. It's personal, but important. Go ahead, he offered, his voice confident. I'll be honest. It's about Elizabeth, I said, gathering my thoughts. She had problems with my size. Will that be an issue for us? If it is, we'd better end this right now, he replied firmly. Elizabeth broke my heart, and in the end, I came to hate her. But there's one American saying I like. It's not about the size of the magic wand, but the magic it makes. And believe me, Noah, you've got all the magic I need. 3 months later, we got married. For the honeymoon, she insisted on Cancun, Mexico, and I let her handle all the details. It turned out her father owned one of the resorts there. Curiously, she never asked me for money. Not for groceries, utilities, or even pool maintenance. Everything just appeared, even the plane tickets. After the wedding, they were arranged without a word. When I suggested bringing the twins, she quickly rejected the idea, saying a honeymoon wasn't the time for kids. Instead, she found a nanny, an elderly Mexican woman who, as it turned out, had looked after Valeria in her childhood. Her husband, Louis, was Valeria's bodyguard when we got back home. They moved in with us, and my boys started calling Valeria Mom, sincerely believing she was their biological mother. The nanny, however, became known as AB, short for Abella. Our kids grew up bilingual, and we never told them the truth about their real mother. Life went on. Miss a thing, my friend. And this is the end of the story.